Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Consumer Studies revision lesson. My name is Lillian Dube, and this lesson is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. Today, grade 12, our knowledge area is exam revision, right? And our topic is the consumer. And our subtopic is sustainable consumption of water and electricity, as well as municipal services. Right, let's move on to the objectives for today's lesson. We want to revise questions from past exam papers on sustainable consumption of water and electricity and municipal services in preparation for the examinations, and refer to DBE 2021 examination guidelines. Right, learners, we have already covered the topic sustainable consumption of water and electricity, as well as municipal services. So we will start with the short questions, which are found in section A of our paper, that is multiple choice questions. So our question number 1 comes with an instruction which says various options are provided as possible answers to the following questions. Choose the correct answer and write only the letter A to D next to the question number. So let's read 1.1 says, which of the following is the responsibility of the consumer? A, selling services. B, using services correctly. C, providing discounts. And D, setting prices. Right, let's answer 1.1, then we move on to the next question. Right, we should be done. Let's move on to our answers. We'll start with question 1.1 says, which of the following is the responsibility of the consumer? Right, so our answer is B, consumers should use services correctly. Right, then 1.2 says, a way to save water in a home. How do we save water in a home? By washing full loads in a dishwasher. That's 1.2. D is our answer there. Then 1.3 says the monthly municipal rates the homeowners pay is used for the following except. The answer is newspaper deliveries. So I told you to take note of the word except there. Right, and then 1.4 says identify a non-renewable source of energy. So the answer there is fossil fuel. So fossil fuels are non-renewable sources of energy. Right, and then the last one, 1.5 says electricity can be served by using. The answer is B, the same size saucepan as the stove plate. Right, that is multiple choice questions that we expect to find in section A of our paper. Right, let's move on to the next question. I'm hoping we got these ones correct. Let's go to question 2.1 says discuss 2 consequences for a community if a municipality fails to manage waste removal properly. And then 2.2 says suggest 3 ways in which consumers can save water when gardening. And 2.3 says explain how illegal electricity connections affect both municipalities and consumers. Right, giving you a few minutes to answer 2.1 to 2.3, then we can move on to the solutions. Right, I'm hoping we are done. Let's move on to the answers. 2.1 says, discuss two consequences for a community if a municipality fails to manage waste removal. So firstly, health hazards increase due to the spread of diseases and pests. So when rubbish is not removed, we usually find flies there, we find rats and mice also eating on the rubbish or on the waste that is not collected, right? And then 2.2 says, suggest 3 ways in which consumers can save water when gardening, right? So they can use gray water. So gray water is the water that we use for washing as well as bathing. We can use it to water the garden. Also, the use of water from the overflow pipe of the geyser can be used to water the garden. So we put a bucket under the pipe. Instead of it flowing onto the ground, we have to put a bucket so that that water falls into a bucket and then we can water the garden. Right, also use rainwater or rainwater tanks or the borehole if you have one, or a well point. Right, and you can also plant indigenous water-wise plants that require less water. Right, then we can be able to save water when gardening. Right, let's move on to the next question. Question 2.2 says, suggest 3 ways in which consumers can save water when gardening. So we are continuing with question 2.2. So it says, use small rocks or pebbles to retain water in the soil, and do not water the garden during the hottest part of the day because the water will all evaporate. And do not water when it is windy, the water will be blown away. Also use a bucket, watering can, drip system instead of hose pipe or sprinkler. Right, and do not water every day. You can only water 2 or 3 times a week. Then we can save water. Right, we move on to question 3. Says, explain how illegal electricity connections affect both municipalities and consumers. Right, so municipalities lose the revenue needed for service delivery because if electricity is connected illegally, then it means those people are not paying for the electricity. Right, and also consumers face power outages and safety risks like electrocution or fires. Right, and then we move on to question 3. Says, redraw the table and provide advantages and disadvantages of each of the energy sources given below. So the first energy source is coal power or coal energy, and then we've got hydropower or energy. So at the top there we can see a coal powered fire station and also a hydro electricity fire station or a hydro power station. Right, so we're supposed to provide the advantages of the coal power energy and the disadvantages of the coal power energy, and also provide advantages for hydropower energy or the disadvantages of hydropower. Right, I'm giving you a few minutes to do that, then we can move on to the solutions. Right, hoping we're done. Let's move on to the solutions. So we're supposed to redraw the table and then provide the advantages and disadvantages of each of the energy sources that are given below. So firstly, we'll look at the advantages of coal power. Coal power is reliable and produces large amounts of energy. And then the disadvantages is that it causes air pollution and contributes to climate change. And then the next one is hydropower. The advantage is that it is a renewable and environmentally friendly source of energy because there are no emissions produced. And then the disadvantage is that it is expensive to build and it can also disrupt the aquatic systems or the aquatic ecosystems. Right, that's coal power and hydropower. Right, let's move on to the next question. Question 4 says, according to Statistics South Africa, municipalities spend more than 20% of their income on electricity. Explain what this money is spent on. Right, let's answer question 4, then we can move on to the solutions. I'm hoping we are done. Let's move on to the answers. So the question says, according to statistics, South African municipalities spend more than 20% of their income on electricity. Explain what this money is spent on. Right? So it is spent on buying electricity from Eskom. It is also used for funding the provision of the free basic electricity for poor households. Also for providing and maintaining street lights as well as traffic lights. Also for providing electricity for municipal offices, buildings, and facilities. And then we move on to question 5, says, read the extract below and answer the questions that follow. So I'm going to read the extract to you, learners. It says, new ways for water efficiency. We flush almost a quarter of the waste water we use down the toilet. In summer, watering our gardens can cause household usage to double. And the question says, suggest how water can be used more efficiently by referring to toilets, that's 5.1, and 5.2 by referring to plants. Right, can we answer 5.1 and 5.2? Then we can move on to the solutions. I'm hoping we are done. Let's move on to the answers. The question says, suggest how water can be used more efficiently by referring to toilets. Right. Firstly, good maintenance of the toilet reduces water usage. Make sure the toilet does not leak. And also, place plastic bottle filled with water or brick into the cistern to reduce the amount of water per flush, right? And we can also lift the handle of the toilet to stop unnecessary flushing. And you can install a dual flush system, right? And we can also use gray water for flushing the toilet instead of using fresh, clean water, right? That has to do with toilets. And then we go on to suggest how water can be used more efficiently by referring to plants, right? With the plants, we plant indigenous plants that require less water. Also, group plants with similar needs altogether, right? And also install a rainwater tank, borehole, so this can be used to water the garden instead of using the municipal water that we have to pay for, right? And then use watering cans or buckets to water the garden instead of using a hose pipe or sprinklers, right? And then do not water plants during the day or when it is windy. And also we move on to question 6, which says read the following case study featured snippet from the verb. I'm going to read the case study for you. It says 100% renewable energy across all sectors possible by 2025, with solar leading the way, the study says. A global transition to 100% renewable energy is possible across the electricity, heat, transport, and desalination sectors by 2050. And it can be done for cheaper than the current global energy system, a new study claim, right? And then the question, which is 6.1, says explain the term renewable energy. And 6.2 says which type of energy is gas. And point 3 says discuss 3 advantages of wind power in South Africa. Right, I'm giving you a few minutes to answer question 6.1 to question 6.3, then we can move on to the solutions. Right, we should be done answering 6.1 to 6.3, then let's move on to the solutions. So it says 6.1 says discuss the term renewable energy. So renewable sources of energy are present in nature, and these are sun, which is solar energy. We have got wind energy, and we've got water, which is called hydropower or hydroelectricity. And then these resources are continually replenished, so they should not run out. Replenishing meaning they are renewable. We use them over and over again, right? And then 6.2 says which type of gas is energy. So which type of energy is gas? So gas is a non-renewable energy, right? We move on to the next question, which is 6.3 says, discuss 3 advantages of wind power in South Africa, right? Firstly, the wind is one of the best renewable sources of energy available. And also it is clean and does not cause air or water pollution. Also, the land below the wind turbines can still be used for farming, right? And it is a good method of supplying energy to remote areas. So these are some of the advantages of wind power in South Africa. Right, let's move on to the next question, which says, evaluate the impact that alternative sources of energy by households during load shedding may have on the environment. So evaluate the impact that alternative sources of energy used by households. So there's used there, which was omitted, used by households during load shedding may have on the environment, right? So let's answer question 7 and then we can move on to the solutions. Right, we should be done with question 7. Let's move on to the solutions. So the question says, evaluate the impact that alternative sources of energy used by households during load shedding may have on the environment. So firstly, we need to know which alternative sources of energy do households use during load shedding. So some people use gas for cooking, some people would use generators, and some people use solar for generating energy. Right. So most of the alternative sources of energy have a negative impact on the environment, which means they contribute to global warming. Or it's not all of them that have a negative impact. So households using solar or renewable sources of energy that is not harmful to the environment and reduces global warming. So we want to look at the impact of those that have a negative impact and also those sources that do not have a negative impact on the environment, right? And then we move on to those that have a positive impact. Gas is the cleanest fossil fuel, that is for those that are using gas. And then inverters also have no noise pollution when they are being used. So we can say maybe we compare an inverter to a generator. Right, and then solar energy also uses the sun, which is a renewable source of energy that is not harmful to the environment. And there is no noise, no air pollution while being used. So this is the positive impact that these sources of energy have on the environment, right? And then we go on to the negative impact that these sources of energy have. We have got gas also can cause unpleasant odors while being used. And gas is also a non-renewable source of energy. That's the negative impact. And then inverters also use electricity to recharge, which has a large carbon footprint. More coal needs to be burnt to generate electricity. And burning coal causes what? Pollution. And remember, coal is a non-renewable source of energy. Right, so that's the negative impact. And also generators, that is those that use diesel or those that use petrol. So they use petrol or diesel, which is crude oil, a non-renewable source of energy, causing air pollution when it is burnt. They also create noise pollution when they are being used. Right? That's the negative impact of alternative sources of energy that are used by households during load shedding. So please take note that when answering this question, you will have to look at the positive impact as well as the negative impact of these alternative sources of energy. Right. Let's move on to the next question, which is question 8. Says, state 3 ways of saving electricity when using a refrigerator. Right. Let's answer question 8, then we can move on to the solutions. We should be done with question 8. Let's move on to the solutions. The question says, state 3 ways of saving electricity when using a refrigerator. So take note of the word saving electricity, right? We must allow air to circulate in the refrigerator, and also do not overload the refrigerator. Remember, a full refrigerator uses less electricity than an empty refrigerator. And also allow hot food to cool before placing in the refrigerator. If you put it while it's hot, the refrigerator will use more energy to cool down the food that is hot, or the hot food will disrupt the temperature in the refrigerator. Thereby, the refrigerator will use more energy so that it gets back to its original temperature. Right, and also set the controls according to the season. When it is cold, we must put it at higher because it will actually be assisted by the changes or the weather at that particular time. Right, and then more points on question 8. Do not open the door unnecessarily. That is the door of the refrigerator, because you are allowing warm air into the refrigerator. Then it means it will use more electricity so that it keeps the original temperature, or for it to keep cool, it has to use more energy. Right, and do not place the refrigerator next to warm areas in the house, especially next to the stove. Let's not put our refrigerators next to the stove because they will use more energy to keep cool. And always leave space behind the refrigerator for the air to circulate. And defrost your refrigerator regularly. Right? And also vacuum the coils regularly because they get dusty and the fridge doesn't function properly. Right? We move on to question 9. Says, suggest ways in which communities can reduce water pollution to improve the state of all rivers? Right, let's answer question 9, then we can move on to the solutions. Right, we should be done with answering question 9. Let's move on to the solutions. The question says, suggest ways in which communities can reduce water pollution to improve the state of all rivers. So firstly, the responsibility of communities is to dispose of their waste properly. They must not just throw their waste anyway, because when it rains, that waste is washed into the drainages, blocking the drainages, and also being washed, that waste is washed into the rivers and the seas. Right, also use eco-friendly products, those products that are able to decompose, even if they are not disposed of properly, but they should be able to decompose. Right, also reduce plastic waste, because plastic is not biodegradable, it does not decompose. Right, also communities can also organize river cleanup, clean up all the waste that has gone into the rivers. Right, that's 1.9. Then we move on to 1.10, says identify the type of pollution illustrated in the picture below. I'm sure we can all see the picture there. That's water gushing out of a sewer or whatever you can see there at the bottom. And then it also says identify 3 causes of this type of pollution in the picture. Right, so we are going to answer question 10 and 10.1, then we'll move on to the solutions. Right, let's move on to question 10, says identify the type of pollution illustrated in the picture below. And then 10.1 says identify 3 causes of this type of pollution in the picture. Right, we go on to the solutions for question 10 and 10.1. Right, so question 10 says identify the type of pollution illustrated in the picture below, that is water pollution. Right, and then 10.1 says identify the 3 causes of this type of pollution in the picture. Right, so these are caused by oil spills, sometimes some sewage-based pipe. Also, litter can cause water pollution. Right, so that's our answer for question 10 and 10.1. Then we move on to the next question, which is question 11, says describe the role that municipalities should play in helping communities to recover from flood challenges. Right, let's answer question 11, then we can move on to the solutions. Right, we should be done with question 11. Let's move on to the solutions. It says, describe the role that municipalities should play in helping their communities to recover from flood challenges. Firstly, they should provide clean, safe, and fresh water. Also, they should fix electrical problems that might have happened during flooding. And also provide shelter for people who lost their homes in community halls. And they should also repair the infrastructure such as potholes in their area that might have developed. Right? More information or more points on question 11 was supposed to describe the role that municipalities should play in helping their communities to recover from flood challenges. So they should also ensure that there is proper sanitation and clean stormwater drains to prevent more flooding to the streets and the yards. Right? They should also clear debris or litter after the flood. And also establish fire and disaster management services to provide or to protect and rescue lives. So ambulances and firefighters should be on standby so that they can rescue the lives of people. Right? We move on to the next question, which is question 12, says, supply the examples of how the distribution of taxes will fund municipal service delivery to citizens. And question 13 says, discuss what municipalities can do to reduce crime and make communities safer to live in. Right, let's answer question 12 and question 13. Right, we should be done. Let's move on to the answers. Question 12 says, supply the examples of how the distribution of taxes will fund municipal service delivery to citizens. Firstly, fire and disaster management. Also, municipalities provide clinics to the citizens. They also provide public transport to our citizens. Also, street lighting is provided by or is funded by the municipality. Parks and recreation are funded and also managed by the local municipalities. Right? Then question 13 says, discuss what municipalities can do to reduce crime and make communities safer to live in. Firstly, they can place cameras in hotspot areas where they know that there is crime, and also they can provide a hotline for community members to report suspicious activities. Right? Also, they can provide more policing within their communities or within their areas, and they should also fix street lights so that community members do not have to walk in the dark. Right? And gate areas to only allow residents to enter. Gating areas meaning providing boom gates to every area so that only the residents can have access. Right? And then question number 14 says, describe the responsibility of residents regarding the use of municipal services. So we want to find out what is the responsibility of residents with regards to the services that they get from the municipality. Right, let's answer question 14, then we can move on to the solutions. Right, we should be done with question 14. Let's move on to the answers. Right, we're supposed to describe the responsibility of residents regarding the use of municipal services. So, communities must submit complaints and recommendations in writing. They should also follow the correct procedure when exercising their rights. Also, they should ensure that their council keeps them informed. Right, and also they should attend council meetings to show support and also for them to stay informed. Right, and also they should pay fees, for example, rates and services promptly so that the municipality can provide them with the services. Right, and they should also respect the municipal rights to other members of the community. And they must allow municipal staff reasonable access to their properties. Right, and also the residents should comply with the bylaws of the municipality. Right, and then we go on to the summary for today's lesson. We said municipalities are responsible for service delivery to the local residents. Also, we said fossil fuels are cheap to produce but not as easy to replace as regenerative energy forms. And also municipalities receive money from rates, license fees and grants from the government with which to run their areas. And municipalities must provide and maintain access roads in their areas. And the last one, we said South Africa has a scarcity of fresh water. So consumers must play their part by reducing pollution, practicing recycle, and finding ways to use water efficiently. Right, grade 12, so we've come to the end of today's revision lesson. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson.